I wanted to first of all, Mr. Adams, start off by talking about this partnership with the Kentucky Guild of Brewers to recruit poll workers on the stuff on beer cans. Talk about that.
Well, the pandemic has highlighted an issue that I talked about last year before I was Secretary of State, which is we have a poll worker crisis in Kentucky. Our poll workers, it takes 15,000 poll workers to conduct a statewide election, and the vast majority of those individuals who volunteer are elderly. Those are certainly the people most at risk under the current regime of this virus. And so we saw going from 15,000 to about 2,000 volunteers in the primary. We had some people quit. So I had to find a way to find younger poll workers. We need younger poll workers anyway. We've got aging generations of volunteers who are not going to be around in this capacity forever, and we need younger people to step up. So I thought, what do young people like? They like beer. That's the way to get their attention. So we worked out a partnership with the Kentucky Guild of Brewers, independent craft brewers around the state. They are putting labels, PSA labels, on their beer cans and bottles that say SOS from your SOS. That's me. It gives folks information how to volunteer to be a poll worker. And we've seen actually a significant increase in the number of volunteers. It's actually not my job to find poll workers. That's supposed to be done at the local level, but we hadn't got the job done adequately at the local level. And so we've been a partner trying to help the clerks. We found about 5,000 poll workers by ourselves of the roughly 15,000 that it takes to run an election. So we've certainly stepped up on our own to try to fix this problem. It's not just unique to COVID-19. This is a generational problem I'm going to have to fix over my term.
So, how many poll workers are needed for this upcoming election, and how many do you have so far?
Well, the short answer is it depends. It depends on how many locations the clerks are able to get locally. That's the other issue that we have that's a challenge. It's not just getting individuals to work the polls. It's where do you put these people? Where do you put these voting locations? A lot of our precincts in Kentucky are nursing homes. That's not going to work for obvious reasons. A lot of places that we normally use are not willing to be polling locations. They're privately held sites. I don't have the power to commandeer them. And it's a liability risk to these sites. Their insurance doesn't cover having the general public in during a pandemic. So the short answer is I don't know yet. We're still working with the counties. They're offering plans to me to review. And so, and of course, the clerks are out there recruiting their own poll workers as well. I'd like to get us up to half capacity if we possibly can. But to be clear, it's not just that we're making possible in-person voting for November 3rd. We're actually going to have 3 weeks of in-person early voting before November 3rd to help us manage the demand of in-person voting without overstressing those sites on November 3rd.
So, if you don't have the poll workers, I mean, the election can still go on, obviously, but what sort of difficulties does that pose?
Well, we've already addressed that, I think, in the fact that we've expanded other methods of voting. We have absentee voting for those who perceive they need it based on their age or their health condition. In a normal election, only 2% of voters vote absentee. This time, I think it'll be higher. It won't be what it was in the primary, 75% then, but it'll be probably a third, maybe 40% of voters will vote absentee. That's right for them based on their age or health. So that takes some pressure off of November 3rd. Also, what takes pressure off is having 3 weeks of in-person voting before November 3rd. That's how I'm going to vote. That's how I encourage all voters to vote if they can, if they're comfortable voting in person, and if they know who they're going to vote for. If you're taking your time, you haven't made up your mind, by all means, make an informed decision. But the vast majority of voters, probably more than 90%, already know who they're going to vote for. So go ahead and vote starting October 13th.
So, how will the general election be different from the primary election?
Well, the governor and I wanted to retain what works so well, which is giving people options. The more choices people have, the higher the turnout. But also, we are able to keep people safe and not overstress any leg of our system of early voting, absentee voting, and election day voting. So we've got those options in place. But here's what we're doing to make it more like a normal election. Number one, we're going to have more in-person voting locations. We're also going to have more days of it. We're going to have 3 weeks of in-person voting, no excuse necessary, no appointment necessary. So plenty of opportunity for anyone who wants to vote in person to do so. And then we're going to have more locations on November 3rd than we had on June 23rd. Some counties have opened up every single one of their locations. Some of them, it's going to be just a smattering. It's going to depend on local circumstances. But another thing that'll be different is we're going to have faster election results. Every state that's voted in the pandemic the last 6 months, they've had to wait at least a week to count all their ballots. That's just the nature of things today. It took New York 2 months to count theirs. They voted the same day we did. We got done in a week. I'm not even happy waiting a week. We're going to have the vast majority of votes counted election night. That's possible because most votes will be cast in person this time. And also because this time the governor and I have required the clerks to process all their absentee ballots as of election night. So we'll have 75 or 80% of the vote in election night. We'll be able to call not every race, but most of them.
Oh, so we'll know the results election night.
Well, we'll know the results in our state. We're not going to know the results in a lot of swing states. So I want to prepare our state for this. We're not going to know who the president is on election night. Even if you wait till 3 or 4 in the morning, like I do, I wait up all night to see what happens. We're not going to know. I think it'll be at least a week or two before we know who carried Arizona and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, all these swing states. They're more reliant on absentee balloting than we are.
Now, when you, I was reading your remarks to the General Assembly committee, and it said that you're scaling back absentee voting. What does that mean?
So what that means is absentee balloting has actually been a constitutional right since 1945. It's not a thing that I've invented. It's something that is already in our law, but it's restricted to certain classes of people. In the primary, we made it no excuse absentee. Basically, we encouraged everyone to vote absentee if they could, and 75% of voters did that. But that wasn't feasible for a general election because the level of turnout is higher. We had 29% turnout in our primary. That's good for a primary. We're going to have, I think, 72% turnout in November. You just can't scale up absentee voting times 2.5 because our system is not designed for that. We can't handle 2 million absentee ballots in our state. States that have a lot of that, they take years to transition into that. So we're not eliminating it. It's still a right that's in our Constitution, but we are limiting that to people who qualify, and that includes people who have an age or health condition or are in contact with someone who has an age or health condition. That could include healthcare workers, food workers, and so forth, caregivers, people who live with an elderly or immunocompromised person. We're trying to limit it to the classes of people who need it so that it's a right that's available to them and we don't crash the system.
Is there a difference between absentee voting and mail-in ballots?
There's a significant difference. I'll tell you one big problem I had in the primary trying to explain all of this is the president had a lot of comments about mail-in voting and didn't at the time discern between absentee voting and mail-in voting. We don't do the latter. Here's the difference. Actually, this was an issue in my campaign. My opponent called for mail-in voting. Under that model, which 7 states have, all on the West Coast, in those models, they register you to vote without your prior consent because your name is in some government database. And then they mail you a ballot you didn't ask for. You can see how the president would find that to be a dubious model. I do too. That's not what we do in Kentucky. We don't register people who are in a government database. You can be a non-citizen and be in a government database. We don't proactively register people. We expect them to do that themselves. And then we also don't just mail out ballots to people. We require people to apply. We require them to prove their identity before we mail out a ballot. If you know that the ballots are coming to everybody on your street, what's to stop you from going to the mailboxes and taking the ballots? That's not a good system, I don't think. We have a better system in Kentucky. And the president has actually praised what we're doing in Kentucky.
Well, and that brings up the issue of voter fraud and different things like that. How do you guard against that?
Well, I ran on a platform of ballot integrity. This time a year ago, I was trailing by 15 points, and the reason I was able to pull off a win is I made the election a referendum on election law policy, and I ran against vote by mail. I ran in favor of photo ID. I ran on it, won on it, wrote it, passed it, and now it's the law of our state. So here's some things that we're doing. Number one, there's a photo ID law now on the books. Every voter needs to bring their photo ID when they vote. If you cannot get a photo ID, that's okay. We understand that today circumstances make that difficult, but you can sign an oath and then you can still vote with a non-photo ID if that's an approved form, a debit card, credit card, a benefit card, or so forth under the circumstances. That will go away in time, but obviously we're dealing with a unique challenge right now. But also on the absentee side, again, we require voters to apply. They have to prove their identity. I've got an MOU with the Bashir administration. Our Go Vote ky.com portal where you get your absentee ballot request in. It's linked to the driver's license database so we can verify your identity from your driver's license. We also barcode track the ballot envelopes on the way out and the way in to make sure we don't have lost or stolen ballots. That also allows the voter to track his or her ballot personally 24 hours a day at govoteky.com and see where it is. We also require every voter to sign in 2 places, and we check the signatures on every single one of these ballots to make sure it matches the voter's signature of record on her voter registration card or driver's license. So we've got very strict protocols, probably the strictest in America.
So, as Secretary of State, you can guarantee, hey, we are not going to have voter fraud in this election.
Yeah, I'll say, well, I can't guarantee that no one's going to try, but I think we'll catch them if they do. I will note that in the primary, we had a lot of predictions from the left of voter suppression, a lot of predictions from the far right about vote fraud. They were all false. They're all proven to be ridiculous conspiracy theories. We didn't suppress voters. We had the highest turnout we've had in modern times, and we also had no vote fraud cases. We had one instance in Owensboro where an individual attempted to vote absentee and in person, but we spotted it. We didn't let that second vote count, and we sent that individual to the grand jury.
Now, let's talk about in-person voting. Someone shows up to the polling place. What is in place to make sure that they are safe, free of COVID? That.
Well, the governor and I have deferred to the county clerks to design their own election plans. The governor and I have the right this time to approve them or disapprove them. If they're inadequate, we'll veto them. One or both of us will do that. But otherwise, we defer to the clerks to design election day. They have different models around the state. In Anderson County, they use drive-through voting. They're able to do that because it just happens the government locally owns several old former bank buildings, and they're able to use those mechanisms for drive-through voting. In Hopkins County, we actually have food truck-like operations where we have mobile voting units that travel around different parts of the county to make sure no one's left out. Election day is different everywhere in the state, but what we're going to see universally is the governor and I require the county clerks to follow CDC guidance. So to the extent possible where we can have people outdoors, we will. That's certainly weather dependent. To the degree possible, we're using larger venues so we can keep people 6 feet apart. We're going to have plexiglass where we need to. We've actually bought 1.2 million pens so far for individual one-time use by a voter to then be discarded, so people don't have to touch the same device over and over again. We have these e-poll books people register in, wiped off every voter. We have the machines wiped off after every voter. So we've got really good protocols, and the government's been really good about getting us all the PPE that we need as well.
I've got a friend up in Ohio, election official, who bought like thousands of Q-tips and get them out. Have you tried that?
It just depends on. We use all kinds of different technology at the local level. Actually, I don't buy the machines or choose them. The counties make those decisions, and so we've got a wild universe really of different types of machines, and different ones can take different types of chemicals or different types of devices, and so they're all over the map. I think some use Q-tips.
Given the factoring in the COVID and all the factors that go along with that, is this going to be a fair election in November?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. And we had a fair election in a pandemic in June, actually one that was celebrated across the country as the most competently executed election in the pandemic. And we're going to have a similarly competent election in November with the same people running it. And we actually have as good a plan or even better a plan than we had before. So I'm very confident we're going to have a safe election, a fair election, and a free election.
You're not worried?
Well, look, there's always things that I'm watching out for. I'll tell you what my biggest concern is. It's not voter fraud. It's not voter suppression. It's not even misinformation, although that's a big problem I've got to deal with these days. The biggest problem is voter unawareness of all the great options they've got to cast their ballots. It's especially hard for me to reach people in Ashland, in Paducah, out in the state, London and Somerset, people in Frankfurt, people in the Golden Triangle. They're getting frequent coverage of all the election changes, but it's harder for me to reach the outer parts of the state. It's hard for me to travel right now and speak to groups. They're just not meeting, and I can't go meet a group of people. So I'm very grateful to you for helping me get the word out on how people can vote. Very quickly, you got 4 options. You can vote in person on November 3rd. You can vote in person before November 3rd. 6 days a week, we'll have polls open. Your county clerk will have those specific locations and hours. You can vote absentee ballot and drop it in a drop box. That gives you the comfort of voting at home and the safety of that, but also the ability to know your ballot was received because you dropped it off yourself. You want to drop off the ballot in the bin, it's like voting in person, only without a line. Of course, the fourth way is to mail back your absentee ballot. We're paying for your postage if you do.
Now, what's the website that all of this is on?
So if you go to govoteky.com, you can register to vote until October 5th at 4 p.m. That's set by statute. You can request an absentee ballot. You can track your absentee ballot if you have requested one. You can update your voter information in case your address or name has changed, and you can also volunteer to be a poll worker. That's at govoteky.com. I have my own site at sos.ky.gov. That's where I put all the new election rules. It's also where I put videos explaining things. It's also where I've got a list of all the currently determined and approved in-person voting locations starting October 13th and running through November 3rd if you want to check.
I will. We'll put a link to that on our website when we air this story.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Right.
And now I don't think we've approved Boyd's plan yet. I'm not sure we've even got it yet. So it won't be on the website yet, but it will be when it's approved.
Also, each county has to have you approve their plan.
That's a big change we made for the general. The governor and I both got a lot of feedback, if you want to put it that way, about single voting locations in big counties, Jefferson, Fayette, Kenton, and so forth, Campbell, Boone. We understood we weren't the decision makers on that, but we understood the concern. And so this time he and I have veto power. If he thinks or I think or we both think a county is inadequate with their in-person voting options, we can veto it. And then they've got to fix it before we can approve it.
Okay. Is there a list of who's been approved and who hasn't?
All the ones that have been approved by both the governor and me are at sos.ky.gov.
Okay.
And I'm not sure what the current total is. It was 26 as of last week, but I know the governor's approved several more since then that I had approved and sent over. So we should be about halfway there at this point, maybe more.
Okay. Do you have anything else, Mr. Adams, you want to add to this?
Just very quickly, the deadlines that are important. October 5th at 4 p.m. is the deadline to register to vote. We've seen a big drop in registration this year because you can't do voter registration drives very easily. But there's lots of interest. People should be registering to vote. GoVoteKY.com, you can do that. The next date to remember is October 9th. That's the last day to request an absentee ballot if that's how you choose to vote. If you want to drop your ballot in the drop box or if you want to vote by mail-in absentee ballot, then you've got till the 9th of October to request that. And the sooner you do, the faster you'll get it. And I would encourage you, if you know who you're going to vote for, go ahead and fill it out and drop it off or mail it, because you're taking a risk waiting too long toward the election that your ballot might be delayed or lost. Of course, you can vote early in person. That's how I'm going to vote. Early in person starting October 13th. 6 days a week, we'll have polling sites open. It won't be full precincts. It'll be one or two locations in most counties. And of course, November 3rd, we're going to have as many locations open as we can. I'm encouraging people to vote before November 3rd and avoid the lines.
Okay. Mr. Adams, pleasure talking with you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for doing this.
Oh, no
Appreciate it.
problem.